There we go.
Yay! So good evening, everyone. It's Rachel from the Bloomfield Public Library, and we are so excited tonight that Clare McCarthy is joining us from the Transcat organization. She has presented for us before on a number of topics, but has never been here for this one. So we are excited to learn and be educated and discuss trans issues in the news. And as we discussed earlier before the program, obviously there was quite a bit of work to do on her part for updating the presentation in light of so much that's been happening. So we are eager to get started to learn about that. But Claire, we want to thank you so much for joining us again. We know you're very busy. Claire is an author, Claire is a podcaster, Claire is an educator and presenter, and I'm probably missing about 10 other things that she does. So we
Claire is
are
tired and needs a nap, isn't that?
so we are very glad that you took the time to be able to be with us tonight. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks everybody for being here. I designed tonight's presentation to be sort of rumor control for you. There are a number of trans-related issues that are being thrust into the news. Very rarely is it transgender people who are putting them into your feed. And I thought it might be a good idea in terms of digital literacy to look at the rhetoric and then the reality behind it. So I'm going to show you what topics I have prepared. There are four of you, counting Rachel. So I'm thinking that if each of you picks a topic, that should get us through the hour pretty nicely. I'll present like 5 to 10 minutes worth of information, and then we'll open it up to questions um, after that and keep things kind of modular. That said, yeah, Transcat the podcast is now in its fourth season. Um, let's do that. There we go. You can find us on a number of the social media at Transcat, and the website is transqat.com, Transqat.com, which is the way my cats told me I had to spell it. So if it doesn't make sense to you, take it up with them. Here are the topics. So the bathroom laws, there are a number of states right now that have passed laws requiring trans people to use the bathroom of the gender they were assigned at birth. So that book challenges, which Rachel already has decided she wants to choose as hers. There is a coordinated national effort going on right now to challenge and ban books that have LGBTQ themes and books that have BIPOC voices. And so that looks at that. One of the arguments, and this sadly has become right in the fore of the news after the Minneapolis shooting and after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The right wing took that as an opportunity to start bashing trans people as being inherently mentally ill. And so I thought that might be worth looking at. As of day one of the current president's presidency, Uh, I was going to use a different word, but I will stay neutral. He initiated a series of executive orders attacking DEI, uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I thought we might take a look at that. There are a number of states that have passed laws against drag performances. Uh, Gender critical feminism is sometimes known as TERF. It is an offshoot of feminism that holds that trans women cannot ever be real women. That once you've had that male privilege, there is no way that you can ever be considered a real woman. So that looks at that a bit. Trans athletes has were a main focus of the 2024 election. $21 million spent on ads that were focused on transgender athletes. The trans regret rate, part of a core part of the rhetoric is that there are this vast body of trans, especially trans youth, but trans people who have had gender affirming care, who then down the road regret it. And at that point, their bodies have already changed, and the argument is that this is doing irreparable harm, and that isn't the case at all, obviously. So we might want to look at that. And lastly, something that is sweeping the nation and has had ramifications here in Connecticut is an out and out ban on gender affirming care for trans youth. So those are the topics. I have no idea how to decide who goes first. Does anybody want to step up and be brave and pick a topic?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
This is Linnell. I apologize for not showing my face, but I've been cleaning house all day and
Oh,
I look a mess. So I just cannot open up my screen. Please forgive me, but that's
not
the
at all.
reason. I'm not trying to be, offish or whatever.
I hope you made some progress because that
Well, I did a little bit, but not nearly enough. So I'm going to be at it again tomorrow. But anyway, I'm very interested in all of these topics
hmm,
because one of my grandsons is now trans.
hmm.
Uh,
Congratulations.
right. Uh, as far as our family is concerned, we're doing well, but I honestly am so worried about him. But I would like to select DEI, if I may. Although I'm
Absolutely.
interested in any and all of them. So if anyone,
DEI it is.
okay, thank you.
So on day one, there was just this slurry of executive orders on a wide range of the topics. And to be honest, none of them were surprises. They were all things that candidate Trump had promised, and most of them in saying, I will do this on day one. So here's a list of the executive orders that are relating to what we're talking about, leaving off things like immigration and his creation of Doge and the slicing up of the federal government. Uh, but there are a number of them that are specifically targeted to DEI programs, hiring processes. He made it very clear that what he wanted was for jobs to be obtained by merit. That's why I put it in caps, not because you fit some sort of quota, and set about essentially firing anybody who fit any of those categories. So people of color, people in the LGBTQ community, the assumption was if you had these federal jobs and you were a part of, and even the disability community, that was another one that he targeted. If you remember, there was a really awful midair collision between a military
Oh,
helicopter and a
right, yeah.
plane, and his immediate response was that, oh, well, this is because some of the traffic controllers were DEI hires, and some of them had, they were neurodivergent, and that's why this happened, with absolutely zero evidence that that was the case. But that's where they went to immediately, is that these were DEI hires. And this is a recurring refrain from this government. This past week I saw a meme about how Joe Biden was a DEI hire. It's part of their rhetoric. And then down towards the bottom of the list here, going after anybody in the military who looked like they weren't white, cisgender, heterosexual Christians. And likewise in schools, cramp, cracking down on curriculum, on the ability to bring in third-party people to supplement curriculum. So anything that even has a whiff of DEI, you are putting yourself at risk. So I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to start with what is DEI? Diversity means that when you look around your workplace, you can see more than one type of person. Are there women in the room? Are there people of color? Are there people with disabilities? Are there people of different religions and ethnicities? Are there people from the queer community? Uh, I'm just going to move this because it is in my way. There we go. Inclusion takes that to the level of, well, yes, they might be in the room, but do they actually have decision-making abilities? Are these people who are actually at the table and have a voice in the way your school, company, institution is functioning? Equity is an interesting point. Uh, Equity is distinct from equality. As Americans, we all have equality, but we don't all have equity. So, for example, everybody has the right to use the sidewalks. We are all equal in that way. We have a right to use sidewalks. But if you're in a mobility device, if you're in a wheelchair, negotiating curbs is a real pain in the butt. Hence, sidewalk cutouts. That's one of the things that the ADA gave us is, well, yes, we all have this, in theory, opportunity, uh, but we can't really act on that if there isn't equity. Same thing with ramps. The Rachel, you guys are rebuilding the library. I'm sure that ADA compliance comes into that effect. One of the things, though, that isn't talked about is that equity is so much broader than just those categories that they're listing for you. One of the things that is in jeopardy is interlibrary loan. That's equity. Okay. One library can't afford to buy all the books. And so when they network together, then you get the opportunity, as we have here in Connecticut, to go online to the Bloomfield Public Library and see that, oh, okay, that movie I want isn't in your library, but it is available in Guilford. So you can have it brought to the Bloomfield Library. That's equity. And that's one of the programs that is very much on the chopping block. Equity means that, yes, we can all be at the same starting point, but some people have obstacles between that starting line and the finish line. And that has to be reckoned with. Otherwise, you don't have equity. Sometimes those are gender related obstacles. Sometimes they're financial, right? Everybody knows that the kid who has the parents with the connections and the money, it's easier to get into colleges. It's easier to get those internships that will get you the good jobs. Whereas if, for families like mine, when I was growing up, my parents made it very clear that I was almost obligated to go to college, but they were very open about we don't have a penny to give you. You're going to have to figure out how to do that. So these are the issues that are involved in equity. Let's do, oh,
Project
here we
2025
go.
isn't just about the ultra-conservative policies that Donald Trump and his allies are preparing for a possible second term in office. It's about how they're going to implement those policies. During his first term, Trump often grew frustrated with senior federal government employees who prevented him from acting on his worst impulses and refused to carry out some of his most extreme ideas. He called his bureaucratic detractors members of the so-called deep state. which is an ill-defined, shadowy entity that he's vowed to dismantle. He and his Project 2025 allies already know how they'll do this, and it largely involves an objective or a directive known as Schedule F. It's a plan that would radically transform the federal bureaucracy and allow Trump to install loyalists all across the federal government. Now, in this regard, Project 2025, which, as you know, I have right here, quite literally picks up where Trump's first term left off. On October 21st, 2020, just 2 weeks before Election Day, Donald Trump signed an executive order that created a new classification of government workers that would be known as Schedule F employees. That sounds rather harmless, but in reality, Schedule F was an effort to drastically reorganize the government in order to give the president more power and control over the federal workforce. Anyone deemed to be in a policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating position would be reclassified as a Schedule F employee. As per Trump's executive order, Schedule F employees would lose their civil service job protections, which meant that replacing them would become a lot easier.
So that's how Project 2025 helped this administration set up a template whereby anybody who even appears to fit the DEI profile, if you will, can be fired at will. And we've been seeing that. We've been watching that play out in the government since January. Here are some of the companies that, as a result of pressure from the Trump administration, have abandoned their efforts at DEI. And by that, I mean hiring practices, educational programs where, like this, where you would bring in a speaker to help you understand something a little better. And if you look through them, a lot of them are companies that you kind of would have expected would be happy to not do that anymore. John Deere and Tractor Supply and Lowe's, the people who are supporting or patronizing those groups are not given to the DEI mentality. But some of them, like Target and Disney and McDonald's, that's a big disappointment. They caved. They caved. There are, over here on the right, there are companies and organizations that have stood firm in their commitment to DEI, but it's getting harder 8 months in. The administration has found more and more ways to pressure companies to abandon DEI. The other aspect of this, of course, is that it gives the administration leverage against universities. And this is something that we could do a whole hour on, the history of anti-intellectualism and the movement towards, instead of, I mean, when I was growing up, your parents would be proud if you went to one of the Ivy League schools and you had that on your resume. Now it's being worked as if that's a liability somehow, as if you've been exposed to some sort of woke curriculum. And there's an all-out war on that going on. The war on DEI helps them to leverage that. And you've seen, if you've been paying attention to the news, you've seen Columbia cave to the president. You've seen other universities cave to the president. Harvard continues to fight, but I don't know for how long. So anyway, that's a brief overview of what DEI is. Let me throw things open to you guys. Questions, comments about that before we pick another topic? Welcome to the new arrivals, by the way. All right. No questions, no comments. Someone who hasn't picked yet. Oh,
I just have a comment. I don't really have a question, but it just seems to me that this is sort of 180 degrees different from what we have been working and striving for so many hundreds of years.
Yes. Yes. And what people who are able to bear children felt when we lost Roe v. Wade, that's what trans people and especially trans youth and their families are feeling right now as we watch all of those rights that we thought we had secured through hard work and dedication gone,
Oh God,
gone.
just in a flash.
It is it is very likely the bits about gender affirming care are in another part of this, but it is very, very likely that before these 4 years are done, we will lose marriage equality. That is almost a certainty. Um, and there again, the work that went into that in terms of educating people and making yourself vulnerable because not to toot my own horn, but in order to do this, you have to make yourself vulnerable to people to say, go ahead and ask me a question. And so a lot of lives were invested in these moves forward, and it just feels like we're being dragged back into the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that my argument actually about the trans situation was that yes, it's difficult now. Well, I mean, this was some months back, but it's difficult. But look back at where we were with regard to gay and lesbian and same-sex marriage and so many other social situations that were contrary to what so many people thought was the right way. And
Yeah.
over time, uh, people began to be, it seemed to be more tolerant and said, oh yeah, I can see that. I can, maybe
That's
I myself won't do it, but I can see that
yeah,
people should have the right to do that. Yeah,
yeah, and that it's at least a reasonable difference of opinion I don't have any exposure to that. I don't know what you're talking about, but an
right,
understanding that we can respect one another, and that's being done away with.
right, right.
Um,
This is the height of disrespect. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you.
Oh, absolutely. Rachel, Sunny, Elizabeth, new person
How
whose
about
name Elizabeth, great. Oh, you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm
There we
unmuted,
go.
but I still can't see myself, so I don't know if you see me waving to you. But
I did.
oh, good. I'd like to hear more about gender affirming care for youth.
For kids. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to take a
good
breath
choice,
because,
Elizabeth. Good choice.
yeah,
I agree. That's what I would have picked too.
I was talking with Rachel about this before you folks joined us, is that putting this together, updating this presentation, really took it out of me. It was like just getting punched in the face repeatedly, as I looked at each of these battles that we seem to be losing. Gender affirming care for youth. This is the current state of the nation. All of the states in red have passed legislation banning anybody under 19 from getting gender affirming care. Let me ask rather than tell. When I say gender affirming care, what am I talking about? What does that mean? Anybody?
Doesn't it have something to do with like puberty blockers, things like that? If somebody's not sure whether they don't want to start developing as a man or a woman, while they're
Right.
still making up their mind, just sort of, keep holding back puberty like they used to do for female athletes, gymnasts and stuff, which was
Right.
okay to do for them, but
And
Yeah.
for decades now, puberty blockers have been used in as a treatment for I don't know if they still call it this, but pernicious puberty for girls who get their periods much too early. Puberty blockers are a way to help them regulate that. Um, Puberty blockers, it needs to be said, do absolutely no permanent changes. They do exactly what you were just saying. They put the process of all those pubertal changes on hold. And as soon as you stop taking them, nature comes rushing back on in and gets you back on track. Um, and as I say, it's something that the actual chemicals that are used in that medication are used in a lot of things. And it's fine. It's perfectly okay until trans people want to do it, and then it's this abuse of medical science. Uh, Gender affirming care for adults runs the gamut from well, certainly therapy, but also hormone replacement therapy, which does do permanent changes to your body, but they're cumulative. It's not like you're on your first. I remember how disappointed I was at the first time I took my estrogen and nothing happened. It was very upsetting. So even that takes time. But puberty blockers, yeah, give you a little bit of breathing room before endogenous puberty changes your body forever. And let me just be candid with you. I look the way I look and I sound the way I sound because I went through male puberty and I dealt with testosterone for 55 years. And I wouldn't look like this and I wouldn't sound like this if I had had access to something like that. Anyway, you can see this huge swath of the middle of the country where it is illegal to get gender affirming care. That means parents have to scramble to find out how to keep their kids alive because they live in a state that says we don't care about you. That means that care providers have to be very, very careful about what they say and who they say it to because they can lose their license. Institutions can be put out of business if they even seem to be providing gender affirming care to anybody under 19. In addition, these 8 states have proposed bans on adult gender affirming care. So even though I came out at 55, I would not be allowed to access hormone therapy, surgeries, so on and so forth, if these laws are passed. And you know that once one of them gets through, all of the states that were on this map, let me see if I can go back. Oh, doesn't seem to want to let me go back. Sorry about that. Uh, will follow suit. So the question this might raise for you, excuse me while I adjust myself here in the chair, is how many kids are we talking about? What, because sometimes the way it's painted is that there's this incredibly insane rush of people who want to change their genders because they saw it on some television program or on an internet feed. Estimates are that there are about 300,000 kids age 13, no, actually age 6 to 17, who identify as trans or non-binary. This breaks it down by the regions. I kind of like the idea that not by a lot, but the biggest section is here in the South, where you find the most opposition. Uh, Let me break that down just a little bit. Of those 300,000, kids age 16 to 17 who had a prior diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is the diagnosis that you need to get from a professional in order to access gender affirming care. Of those people who already had that diagnosis, almost 15,000 started hormone replacement therapy, and just under 5,000 started puberty blockers. What does that mean? Well, I did a little bit of math, and that means that roughly I forget which year this is. I'm gonna say 2018, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Whichever year that these stats were taken, we were talking about a little under 300 kids per state who started HRT, a little under 100 who started on puberty blockers. We live in Connecticut, so I did that math. That comes out to 0.039% of Connecticut's youth started hormone replacement therapy, and 0.013 started puberty blockers. There is no mad rush into gender affirming care. There might be the occasional person for whom this is not right, and they will find that out both on their own and through exposure to the professionals who will be guiding them. So there is no mad rush that needs to be stopped by legislation. Another one of the executive orders that came out on not quite day one, but close, you can see down here, January 28th, is Executive Order 14187. And I cannot begin to tell you how vile the language in this is. It's language that was stolen from Project 2025, as is so much of this administration's approach. It is entitled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. It is full of exploitative language like that designed to get the base stirred up. It has very little basis in reality. Once that executive order went into effect, though, once he issued that, then people in the administration who actually have control of policy were able to act, were in fact ordered to act. Before I go on, I forgot I put this on there. One of the things that this executive order describes is rapid onset gender dysphoria, where gender dysphoria, the way things are listed in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, is somehow being cycled through, right? Like very, very quickly, where people are just all of a sudden deciding, yeah, I have gender dysphoria, and it's started really quickly. I thought of it last week, and now I want to get medication and surgery. That doesn't exist. That's not a diagnosis. There is absolutely no credible evidence anywhere that it is a diagnosis. And so their logic, their argument for why they are banning kids from getting the life-saving health care that they need is false. What is true is that every single credible medical association supports gender affirming care for youth as not just effective, but necessary. All of these groups that you probably have heard of, they all say that, as opposed to some words chosen for hyperbolic effect by Project 2025. Yes, Skirmetti. Tennessee passed a law that banned puberty blockers and hormone replacement hormone replacement treatment for anybody under 19. The appeals courts after that reversed it, said that that is not that can't stand, that is against the 14th Amendment. And so it works its way up to the Supreme Court, and this past June, they heard and ruled on the case. And the Supreme Court ruled that the law does not violate the Equal Protection Act of the 14th Amendment, that essentially transgender kids do not have any sort of a right to health care if we decide we don't want you to have it. That opened the floodgates for all of those states that you saw in red a couple of minutes ago to fashion the templates for their legislation and to get them passed, because once the Supreme Court rules on it, everything else just falls like dominoes. So, as with Roe v. Wade, we lost a big one here. And kids are going to die because of it. Kids are going to die, and they don't care. The government, as it implemented the executive order and as Skrmetti happened, they are using Medicare and Medicaid as leverage. So any institution, any medical institution that accepts Medicare and Medicaid is going to lose that unless they stop providing gender affirming care. That act is under a temporary restraining order. Everybody involved in this understands that that restraining order is going to fall very soon. It's just a matter of time. 2 of the 5 institutions here in Connecticut that provided gender affirming care for youth, Yale Pediatric and Connecticut Children's, made a decision to pre-comply, which is to say that instead of saying, no, we stand by this and you're going to have to actually jump through all your legal hoops and force us to stop, they decided to cave early. So Connecticut Children's and Yale Pediatric are no longer offering gender affirming care for youth. I would just recommend it'll come back to me. I did an episode recently where we did, I think the second episode of season 4 was with Dr. Nicholas Mead from Yale Medical, and we talked about that, and it broke my heart, just broke my damn heart. But it's not just that. In order to pursue this hunt against providers who might be considering getting around these restrictions, the federal government is subpoenaing records, which means that if your child is seeking or has sought gender affirming care, they're going to confiscate those records and they're going to know. HIPAA be damned. We need to know about this transgender menace. That's bad enough, but what that leads to for the kids, for the parents, for the providers, are things like doxing, where supporters of these far-right podcasters and politicians will hack through the system and get all your private information, your phone number, your address, where your kids are, what school they go to, and they will release that onto the web. That's called doxing. They also engage in something called swatting, which is where they call in a terrorist report at your address. Now that they've made your address public, they will call in that there's terrorist activity, suspected terrorist activity going on at McCarthy's house. You need to send the SWAT team. And the SWAT team comes breaking in and zip tying everybody, and they'll sort it out later. And of course, oops, sorry. No, thought I had another thing there. Sorry, hang on. So as awful as that is, let me end with some, as I say, rumor control facts. There's no provider anywhere who offers gender affirming care surgery for minors. So this nonsense that you heard candidate Trump spouting during the election, where little Johnny goes to school as a boy and comes back as a girl, is nonsense. There is no surgery. Anybody under 19 is not eligible for surgeries. In order to acquire gender affirming care for a minor, parental consent is already required. That's built in. So when they suggest that it isn't, when they suggest that kids are somehow pursuing this without their parents' knowledge, that's incorrect. Puberty blockers, as I say, cause no permanent changes. Generally speaking, this is not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, providers do not okay hormone replacement therapy until you're at least 16, which is kind of scary because a lot of people are already well on their way through puberty by 16. Um, but nonetheless, that's sort of the standard operating procedure for providers. Psych evaluations, therapy, and consistent evidence that you have this gender dysphoria over a period of time are all required. So when they pretend it's not, don't believe them. Nobody's handing out puberty blockers as if they were chiclets. Nobody is conducting surgery on kids without anybody else knowing about it. Just isn't happening. Plus, I would point out that there is Public Act 25-154, which makes it illegal for care providers to discriminate. So now they're being bullied by the federal government to stop gender affirming care. But this law says that you can't discriminate. You must provide care. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. That, oh, that is gender affirming care for youth and what's going on behind the rhetoric. Please ask me a question or two so I can pull myself together.
Thank you for going through that with us. That was very eye-opening. Can you explain gender dysphoria for anyone who may need the definition?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Um, it is, it's actually, here, let me move my mouse here. It is in this trans as mental illness section, if we decide to go there. That it has evolved over time. I'll give you the short version. It has evolved over time. Gender dysphoria, as it currently exists in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, is very clear that there is nothing wrong with gender diversity. There is nothing wrong with being uncomfortable in the gender that you were assigned at birth, that is perfectly fine. What is the dysphoria comes about from trying to live in a society that won't let you explore, express, live in that, and try to resolve that cognitive dissonance between what I know I am and what I know society will not tolerate. So that's currently where we are with gender dysphoria, is that it's nothing, there's nothing inherently wrong with you. It's just that society hates your guts.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
Uh, um, Sunny, it's your turn to choose.
Woo! I love how you're willing to throw each other under the bus.
Um,
I'd like to commend you for that.
uh, all right, let's see. I'm glad I like the gender affirming care for youth. I know that's a big issue and important. How about trans athletes?
Ooh, okay, fair enough. Um, so the rhetoric around trans athletes has to do, or at least it started to, before things kind of got out of hand, was a discussion of the meaning behind Title IX. And this statement is opinion, but I happen to be right. Title IX is one of the most important and successful pieces of legislation this country has ever managed to pull off. It is hands down invaluable. What it says is that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of, let me move this so I can see the screen. Sorry. On the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now, that's what the law says. The way it's been interpreted since it was put into place is that this has to do with women's sports. That is not the full extent of it. Title IX also covers things like sexual assaults on campus, and all sorts of things like that. It's just that nobody was talking about trans athletes or trans people, so that's not included in here. I would suggest, as a language person, I would suggest that no person in the United States is pretty clear. It doesn't say no person in the United States except you, McCarthy. It says no person. Here's what we're not talking about when we talk about trans athletes. If you are masculine presenting, if you were AFAB is an acronym that we use for assigned female at birth. So if you were assigned female at birth, but you are working toward transitioning towards something more masculine, either as transgender or as non-binary, we're not talking about you. Absolutely everybody from the federal government to every single athletic association on the planet agrees that if that's you and you want to play in men's sports, great, do it. Good luck to you. So we're not talking about that. There are plenty of team sports that likewise don't care. You're part of the team. Teams require a lot of different skill sets in order to be successful. So if you made the team, if your coach thinks that you are valuable to the team, then it's not an issue. And here's the important thing. If you're not winning, nobody cares. You might be aware that here in Connecticut, we were at the center of a national lawsuit involving two black runners on the track team who were winning. And they became the focus of this national campaign. And my understanding is that this lawsuit is still ongoing, even though now everybody involved in the lawsuit is out of college. This was started when they were in high school. And it's just going to be going on forever. But what people don't necessarily know is that there was a third transgender runner on the teams at the same time as them, but she wasn't winning. She was a middle of the pack runner, and so nobody cared. Good on you. Go do all the wonderful things that sports can give you, right? A sense of teamwork and leadership and commitment and all the things we say we value. You go do that. But if you start winning, then we're going to have an issue. Here's what is at issue. Only trans women / girls, because most of the time we're talking about high school sports. And then, as with every problem in the world, it comes down to money. The issue is scholarship money. The language of the case was called Soule, Soule. The heart of that was that a trio of cisgender girls on track teams were suing because they felt they had been denied scholarship money, that they had been cheated out of college scholarship money by these, to use their language, biological men playing girls' sports. This is a quote from Fair Play, which is a book that came out 2 years ago by Katie Barnes. This idea that there is some sort of scholarship scheme going on in high school athletics, this idea is fear-based and has no factual basis. To date, there has not been a single known transgender woman who came out publicly in high school and received a scholarship to compete on a collegiate women's team. There is no issue that they're just manufacturing it.
Anti-trans rhetoric is a regular part of Donald Trump's stump speeches. He regularly lies about kids going to school and receiving gender-affirming surgeries before they return home. But now in the final stretch, Republicans have been putting out increasing amount of ads that are anti-trans, making it essentially their closing argument. Help us understand the scope and the rhetoric in these ads.
I have tracked around $100 million in ads. We see Donald Trump spending more money on these ads than on housing, immigration, and the economy combined. This is a major issue for him. Meanwhile, you have groups like the Senate Leadership Fund dropping extreme amounts of money in Senate races in Ohio, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, and they're all focused on transgender people.
The top issues, according to most polls right now, is the economy, abortion, immigration. So why do you think Trump and his allies are making this one of their main closing arguments?
It's important to note that some of the biggest benefactors of the Republican Party, some of the most influential organizations in the party, we're talking groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, for instance, have made this their main issue. If you're running a campaign in a place like Pennsylvania or Ohio or Michigan at any level and you want money in your campaign, targeting trans people is a really good way to do that. But as for Trump, I think that there's something different at play here. I think that this is a classic fear campaign. We've just got polling today showing that Harris is catching up on the economy and on other issues that Republicans tend to poll well in. And so the purpose of a fear campaign is to distract you from issues that you normally care about.
That woman who was just speaking is Erin Reed. And if you want to be a little bit overwhelmed but well informed, I would subscribe to her feed. She has a Substack. She is a journalist who focuses on transgender issues. Every day she puts out a story on something that is happening in the country, in the world, related to attacks on transgender people. For me, it's brilliant journalism. I'm so grateful she does it, but there are days when I can't even open up that email. There are days where I actually apologize to her in my as I'm reading my inbox. I'm like, I'm sorry, Erin, I can't do that today. So I would recommend you check out Erin Reed. Oh, stop it. There we go. Okay, are you ready for this? This is McCarthy math. All right. According to the Williams Institute, there are 1.6 million trans and gender nonconforming people in the United States. Of those, 300,000 are between the ages of 13 and 17. So the age that we're talking about in terms of competitive high school sports, right? So you've passed beyond the sort of park and rec soccer where everybody get out there and play, and the parents will just cheer from the sideline. This is where things start getting competitive. This is where money gets on the line. So we're talking about potentially 300,000 trans and gender nonconforming kids. According to the National Student Clearinghouse, 53.8% of youth are involved in sports. So a little over half, which means that now, to use rough numbers, we're talking about 150,000 trans non-binary kids. That's still a lot of kids, though. That's still a significant chunk. Again, the Williams Institute says that 38.5% are trans feminine. Because remember, I said that if you're trans masculine, nobody cares. You can go do whatever you want. If you were assigned female at birth and you want to try out for the football team, we wish you the best of luck. So that brings us down to just under 58,000 kids. Now, this is where the research really comes in. I checked out Outside Magazine, and they have 5 tiers for athletes. Okay. Tier 1 is recreationally active. So that means you probably go out for a walk or a bike ride a few times a week. You hit the gym occasionally. You're recreationally active. Pardon me. Tier 2 means you are trained or developmental. So maybe you're training for a 5K. And so you're working out or you're on the treadmill every day. Tier 3 is what we're talking about because tier 3 is highly trained or national. And the numbers that they give is that applies to 0.014% of people involved in sports, which means that we now go from 57,750 trans and non-binary kids to 8.1. All this legislation, all those red states I showed you, 8.1 kids nationally. But McCarthy couldn't just leave it there. There are 50 states, which means that you are talking about 0.016 kids per state, which roughly rounds out to about 1 kid for every 5 states. That's what this rush to push legislation against trans feminine people abusing Title IX and women's sports. The reality is that all athletic associations before 2020, before 2016, even when this first started up with the first Trump administration, all athletic associations had rules and regulations as to how they were going to deal with trans athletes. The religious right came into power with Trump, and they decided that wasn't good enough, that they knew better than the experts. And so they've been pushing all of these anti-trans legislations for 0.016 kids per state.
How many athletes are there in the United States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Less than 10
Yep.
out of 510,000?
Yep.
Yep. That's what all of this hubbub is about. So that at the level that we're talking about for high school sports, 0.016 kids per state. When you get into elite NCAA competition, maybe 10. That's what you, so rather than fix our roads and bridges, rather than fix our education system, rather than deal with food insecurity, those 10 people are where you're spending millions and millions of dollars? Really? Sex. Well, I think we all know how we think sex works. The doctor, takes a peek. Oh, I'm sorry for the miming. The doctor takes a peek between your legs when you're born and makes an assignment, decides you're either male or female, and there are no other options. The doctor isn't given any leeway. And I'm not entirely sure why that decision has to be made in that instant. But the reality is that sex is determined by 5 characteristics: your chromosomes, your external genitalia, your hormones, your internal genitalia, and the one that nobody ever seems to talk about, but that frankly I think is the most important. It's the one we judge first of all when we're gendering people, and that is the secondary sex characteristics. Nobody takes a peek down your pants before gendering you, before deciding to say whether to say thank you, ma'am, or thank you, sir. They look at your secondary sex characteristics. And if you have breasts, that's a pretty good clue. And if you have a beard, that's a pretty good clue. And if your voice sounds like that, sometimes it's a good clue. Sometimes it's not. Athletics chooses to only test for one of those. Athletics determines your eligibility to participate in women's sports by measuring your hormone levels, which seems that if you really wanted to be accurate, maybe you'd be testing more than that. Hi, sweetie. Sorry, one of my cats has just joined us. The argument goes that if you go through endogenous puberty, if you go through the puberty of the gender that you were assigned at birth, and if that puberty was male puberty, you're going to have an advantage in sports. Now, I'm not going to argue that that's false. I will tell you that there is no clinical evidence proving that. And if you listen to the rhetoric, they always refer to mythical common sense. It isn't necessarily true. Probably true in, I don't know, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, but it isn't necessarily true. Also, if that's really your concern, ready for me to solve a world problem right here with you? Provide us with gender affirming care when we're kids. Then we won't go through that endogenous puberty and we won't have this mythical advantage in sports. If that's really what you care about, protecting girls in girls' sports, do the right thing. Give us puberty blockers when we're kids, when we say we need puberty blockers. But that's not going to happen. Anybody familiar with that flag on the left? Yellow field, purple circle. Anybody know what that is?
Intersex?
That is the intersex flag. There are just here in the States somewhere between 3 to 5 million people who are born with intersex conditions. And that might refer to any of the five, well, actually the four major, we leave off secondary sex characteristics, but who might have unexpected chromosome levels, hormone levels, unexpected external genitalia, unexpected internal genitalia. 3 to 5 million people are walking around the United States right now, living, breathing proof that gender is not and cannot be a binary. It's a spectrum. There are people out there who have vaginas and internal testes. There are people who have something other than XX chromosomes and XY chromosomes. Nobody talks about it, which is why you don't know about it. And for generations, these intersex kids, these intersex kids were forced as infants to have corrective surgery so that they would fit the preconceived notion that you need to be either A or B and that there cannot be anything in between. That is unnatural. And so they would operate on babies. Medical science has moved away from that, but only frighteningly recently. I'm going to recommend that you read Castor Semenya's book. Castor is the best 800-meter runner in the world. But because she looks kind of masculine, she was subjected to all sorts of testing. She was actually duped into showing up for what she thought was a meeting and turned out to be an invasive investigation of her body.
Hmm.
At which point they, And she found that she was intersex. She had no idea, had made it to adulthood without knowing that she had internal testes, had no interest in identifying as a different gender, but was basically violated by athletic officials in order to prove that she didn't have an unfair advantage.
Mm.
Her book is amazing, and I recommend it to you. Oops. Nah, there we go. Well, once again, light, fluffy topics. Thanks for staying with me. Um, Rachel, it is 7:41. Do you want to do one more?
Well, I still have a question.
Please, Elizabeth, go.
I'm, I listened to what you've said with great interest because, for various reasons, which have to do with contact sports
Hmm.
and some of the situations that, I've heard about where, how do you address the strength difference issues that not always, and now I'm learning that it's not always there. And it's
No,
only a concern when the person is winning. And so I
right.
see, I
I
have a
was,
wider view of it, but there is some situations where they are. And there was one person, a transgender woman who was be- before she was transgender, she was not winning against the males. And then when she turned transgender, she was at the top of her.
what sport are you talking about?
I'm not a sports person, so I'm
Yeah. And
sorry.
that's what I'm getting at is that these are stories,
Oh, no,
exactly what you're describing are stories that are being put out there without anything to back them up. And as soon as you say there are people out there there are boys, masculine, burly boys who are transitioning in order to gain an unfair advantage, it just isn't true. Contact sports, by and large, are sports that are dominated by boys' sports, right? So your football team, your hockey team, um, are there other contact sports that I'm forgetting? Probably.
wrestling, I don't know.
Wrestling, yeah, there you go. Oh, wrestling. Um,
Rugby.
at the beginning of my second season, second or third season. My first episode of the season was with a wrestler named Mac Beggs, who was at the center of a nationwide controversy. He's a Texas. He still is in Texas. Um, is a trans man, and I encourage you to listen to Mac. What they put him through, nobody should have to go through. And the I mean, in terms of what you're saying, it just doesn't exist. There isn't anybody who's transitioning in order to gain an unfair advantage. Um, and
I'm not saying, I don't say that the person was transitioning in order to get an unfair advantage. It just,
mhm.
but it seems to exist.
No. Before all of this legislation, as I say, there were rules in place. And if you didn't meet those rules, and generally they had to do with hormone levels. If your testosterone level was above a certain point, you weren't eligible to participate. So in terms of the rules that were working perfectly fine, they were being regulated so that there wouldn't be unfair advantage. The rhetoric comes along and says, oh, it's the wild, wild west out there. We need to clamp down on all this. No, you didn't. There were already rules. And to be honest, rules that were unfair to trans women athletes. They were discriminatory, but those were the rules. and everybody who was involved in the sports understood them and followed them. So if um, what's the um, what's the high school sports association here in Connecticut? The CIAC?
CIAC.
I think so, yeah. Um, if you're meeting the requirements that your state government has set, then there's no unfair advantage. And if there is, you take it up through that state agency. Sorry, couldn't find the word. Um, but that's every time you hear something like that, it's rhetoric. There were stories during the Olympics that actually they jumped in on this one. Oh, was it a boxer? Maybe it was a boxer. I don't recall. But there again seemed to be pummeling her opponents and presented as kind of masculine. So the anti-trans stories started up, and this person wasn't trans at all in any way. They were just kind of a masculine looking woman. And they they falsely outed her as being trans and with everything that goes along with that. So these are stories that are being used to gin up antagonism, but that's kind of what I'm saying here is you would need to poke at those. All right, Rachel, we're talking 10 of. What do you want to do?
I want to know if there are any more questions.
That cat had a question. And my answer is yes, feeding time is soon. No other questions? Rachel, you want me to
Yeah,
zip through
I have
book
a
challenges
question.
before we go?
I
Oh,
have a question if that's possible. Anyone there? Hello?
I'm hearing parts of what you're saying.
I'm myself off of the speaker and you can hear me now a little better.
A little bit, yes. Go ahead.
Okay. So I have a unique position. I'm actually a pediatrician, and we actually end up having to deal with this on a more common basis, and probably thankfully so, because prior to this, despite the climate that you're mentioning, there is an improvement and a better understanding amongst all parties about how, as you mentioned, this is not some nefariously trivial act that people do. They wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to do this, which, obviously does happen with a lot of things that teenagers do. And that's why they're projecting or transferring, I guess is a better word of the impulsive acts of teenage, of adolescence. This is probably not one of them in all likelihood. You're asking for uh, something that is enormously difficult, and unless it were true, would be incredibly inane to pursue. I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know if that makes any sense. So anyway, what people fail to realize is that it's not just not only a trivial decision; it's also a decision once it's made is comprehensively analyzed by both the pediatrician and to a much greater extent pediatric endocrinologists, psychologists for important reasons, as well as the parents and family members, which I found, at least in most cases, gratifyingly supportive, which is, I think, half, if not most of the battle with these kids. The one thing I wanted to say is that I think the disconnect with athletes comes with the fact that there was a swimmer. I think that maybe that's what the one you were referring to, where the body mass, the fat, lean mass was considered to be advantageous. And that's where the gray area, I think, is. Obviously, he was transitioning. She was transitioning, I should say, and they felt it was an advantage. But like you said, it's an extremely tiny sliver of the general milieu, the general landscape. But I'm not sure if there's an easy answer either way. Ultimately,
No,
people
and
got
that's the exactly the point, that all of these things on this board are complex questions that require complex approaches. And
right.
anybody who says that you can solve these concerns about transgender, about trans feminine athletes like that there's an easy or there's an obvious solution, they're lying to you. If you want
Right.
to address it correctly, you bring in all the stakeholders, you carve out time, maybe 10 years, to actually do a study. And then you pull all that together rather than just ramming through legislation. So
No, I
yeah,
agree.
thank you so much for all of that. I agree with you.
One other thing I wanted to mention was you could easily generalize that in the 80s, 90s, when Martina Navratilova was basically cleaning up the women's circuit because she was an incredibly gifted athlete. And even now, even in these semi-enlightened times with Serena Williams, they said they had an unfair discrimination, and and they had no issue with their gender. So ultimately, I think people will find a way to blame someone who may or may not be very good in their sport. As you mentioned, you have to be winning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I don't know.
Rachel, I'm gonna have to run here fairly soon.
Mm-hmm.
I can do book challenges in 5 minutes.
Let's do it.
Want to do it? All
Yes.
right. So this will be my farewell. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating in this. I really appreciate it. Book challenges. The American Library Association has been collecting data on banned and challenged books since 2001. And for the first 20 years, things were very consistent. There was 200 to 300 challenges per year. And most of those were over classics that were part of the curriculum. So there would always be a couple of parents who said, I'm really not comfortable with the fact that Mark Twain uses the N word. I don't want that book in my kid's curriculum. Or I don't like that character. Or I don't like the fact that you're teaching a book about adultery. Uh, wouldn't there be something else? So, in other words, things that could be reasonably discussed. And they were pretty consistent. Then, starting in 2021, you have this exponential increase in the number of titles that are challenged. Uh, can anybody think of anything that might have happened in 2020 that would trigger this kind of activity? Anything that might have upset people on the far right?
COVID?
Oh, interesting. That certainly gave them more time on their hands than was good for them. Yes.
That was good for us.
Biden being elected.
Biden was elected and they contested the election. And so, as part of the strategy for how do we come back from this, part of that attempt was we're going to go after at the local level, at the school and the town board level. We want people getting involved and moving things toward our policies. So you see this exponential increase in
Things that happen
books.
in libraries are
Oh.
often reflective of whatever collective moment the society is in. There's definitely a moment happening where people feel the need to object to concepts or thoughts or ideas that maybe make them feel uncomfortable. I will say that the reason I love libraries and the reason I love my profession is that I think the purpose of the library is to make us uncomfortable. Over the course of my career, the course of my life, I grew up in my library. I have read so many things and encountered so many things in public libraries that have made me uncomfortable, and that is how we grow. I do feel like this is a moment, just like back in the early 1980s with the moral majority and Jerry Falwell, that was a moment as well. And these things they appear to happen in kind of these cycles.
That's Ramona Berkey, the director of the Russell Library in Middletown. She and another voice you'll be hearing in a second were on a show of mine from the end of last season where we talked about the funding challenges and the censorship challenges that public libraries are facing right now. So where are all these challenges coming from? Nominally, as this infographic from the ALA says, 72% of them are being initiated by pressure groups or the decision makers who have been bullied into doing what they want. So board administrators, elected government officials, and pressure groups, not grassroots efforts. Although that's kind of what it looks like if you're a local librarian, because it's one of the people from your town who will come in to object. The driving source behind this is a group called Moms for Liberty. They were started, here's a coincidence, in 2021. I am shocked. Now they have chapters in 48 states, 310 chapters. These numbers are actually a couple years old, so they're probably well over 12,000 members at this point. They were founded by these two women, Tina Desevich, and please let this be her real name, Tiffany Justice. They started, I so want that to be her real name. It started in Florida, a very vocally anti-trans state. It started during COVID, as one of you just said a minute ago. The people were at home and they had time on their hands. And it started as part of that government pushback during COVID, anti-vax, anti-masks. And then when COVID kind of passed, it morphed into this so-called parents' rights movement. Here is, because really nothing in a library is more appropriate than a sword. Here is Governor Ron DeSantis presenting them with a sword. I don't know. I've been in many libraries in my lifetime. Never really needed one, but maybe I'm doing it wrong.
Claire, it's 130,000 members since 2024.
Great, Caesar's undershorts. The Southern Poverty Law Center lists Moms for Liberty as an extremist group, even though they will present themselves as otherwise. As a 501(c), they don't have to disclose their funding, but their sponsors are usually pretty vocal about stepping up and saying, here's what I did to support Moms for Liberty. So the Heritage Foundation, $25,000 grant, something called the Leadership Institute, which bills itself as a school for disciple makers. Brags that they are the top donor. There is at least one donor who's given $1 million, another one who's given 500,000. So this is not grassroots. This is something that is funded by right-wing think tanks and organizations, and is being top down rather than bottom up. You might be familiar with 4 years ago, Texas Representative Matt Krause presented to the Texas legislature a list of, wait for it, 850 books that needed to be banned from the library. And as you go through the list, and I don't recommend you spend any time doing that, but as you go through the list, it's all BIPOC voices and LGBTQ voices. Anything that presents Black Americans as being
Human.
sympathetic individuals, get it off the shelves. Anything that suggests that trans and lesbian and gay and bi kids are just as normal as any other kids, get it off the shelf. We don't want it. 850 of them. Here are the books that have been at the top of the ALA's most challenged for the Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, which is a wonderful graphic novel, was at the top for, I think, 3 years running. It got dethroned this year by All Boys Aren't Blue here. But these have been in the top five with Juno Dawson's sort of a self-help book called This Book is Gay, and Mike Corrado's graphic novel Flamer um, have been in the top five since this nonsense started in 2021. And again, with the doxing and the swatting and the death threats for librarians who would dare to stand up to these pushes. So imagine that you're doing your job as a librarian and suddenly all of your private information is available and you're getting phone calls at all hours of the night and you're getting death threats on social media and through text because they've of course released your phone number onto the internet. And you're never really sure if that van down the end of the street that's moving kind of slowly is waiting for you to come out or if they're just moving in. I have friends who have been doxxed. It is not something you want happening to anyone you care about.
But I think that the piece that's behind all of this that we can't forget about is that this whole thing to challenge books and censor books, it exists to build distrust in one of our most trusted institutions in America, with, I believe, the ultimate goal of defunding and destroying libraries for the future.
That's Ellen Paul, the director of the Connecticut Library Consortium, who was another one of the guests on that episode last season. Can't recommend that enough. They were wonderful. I also had Jen Billingsley from the Portland Library, who was lovely. I'm going to leave this with the words of somebody who is much more eloquent and respected and frankly good looking than me. LeVar Burton, who says, read the books they don't want you to read. That's where the good stuff is.
On a note of hope, Reading Rainbow has just been revamped with
No!
a TikTok librarian who is famous in our circles. We met him at one of our conferences, and he is now the face of Reading Rainbow. And the first episode just dropped Saturday, so I highly recommend.
Oh, can't wait. Can't wait. I loved Reading Rainbow.
He was inspired by LeVar Burton when he was a kid. He's a library kid. He's Latino and Black, and he has more library joy than anyone I've ever met. So very, very exciting. So I will try to send out all of these things you've mentioned in my email to the group. The links and the podcast and Reading Rainbow and all of this. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Claire, for taking this time with us. I think we all have a lot to process, and I would love to have you in person for part 2 of everything we didn't get to in the near future.
Can't wait to see the new place. Would love to see some of you in person.
Yep, we will do it. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Claire. Thanks,
You bet,
Rachel.
folks.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.